Hello and welcome to the RSCS World Built Environment Forum COP26 mini webinar series. I would like to take this opportunity to thank A-Site, our lead tech partner. My name is Kisa Zara, and today over the next hour, we will be looking at Beyond Net Zero 2050, fossil fuel free by 2050. How practical a proposition is this? How would the transition be managed? What would be the effect on economies and what opportunities would it bring? I'm joined today by three panelists. Mark Jacobson. Hi, Mark.
Hello. How are you?
Hi. And Richard Bates.
Hi, Kisa. Hi, everybody.
And finally, Sam Benjamin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
We have registrations from over 20 countries and always welcome your active involvement. Do please submit questions to our panel. It really helps us to bring the conversation to life. If you are new to these webinars, you should see that you can submit questions at any time using the question box on your screen. We will pick up as many questions as we can. You may also we'll pick up as many questions as we can. So first question is to Mark. How feasible is fossil-free energy by 2050 on a global scale?
Yeah, so I've been working on looking at this issue for quite some time, and we think that it is definitely feasible not only to transition by 2050 to entirely clean renewable energy worldwide, but even sooner, possibly by 2040 or 2035. And this is across all energy sectors, which are the main ones are electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. And each sector will be a little different. In each country will be a different timeline, but it is definitely possible from a technical and economic point of view to transition. We have 95% of the technologies we need today to transition entirely to clean renewable energy. And that would require electrifying all energy sectors, and there's some direct heat, and then providing the electricity and heat for all sectors with just clean renewable energy, namely, in our case, we're looking only at wind and water and solar, which includes, there's also geothermal in there and hydroelectric and some tidal wave power, and also storage. And the main energy technologies we'd use that are electric, different from today, are mostly heat pumps, electric vehicles, electric for industry arc furnaces, induction furnaces, dielectric heaters. These are all existing technologies. The ones that we don't have are like long distance aircraft and long distance ships running on hydrogen fuel cells, for example. That would be green hydrogen fuel cells. So anyway, I could go at length at this, but I'll stop there.
So Denmark and Sweden have pledged to go fossil free by 2050, but both of these countries have very small populations. So what about countries such as the US and the UK, who are quite large?
Yeah, so we've actually developed plans for 145 countries now, including the US and the UK and Sweden and Denmark. In fact, all these countries that we've looked at represent about 99.7% of the emissions worldwide. And we find that it is definitely less expensive to transition, and the faster you do it, the better. First of all, when you transition to electricity for just about everything and then provide the electricity with clean renewable energy, your power demand overall worldwide goes down about 57%. And that's because of the efficiency of heat pumps versus like boilers, gas heaters, the efficiency of electric vehicles over internal combustion engine vehicles, the efficiency of electric industry over combustion industry, and also eliminating all the energy in mining, transporting, and refining fossil fuels, and even uranium, which is about 12% of all energy worldwide. And that's accounting for additional end-use energy efficiency improvements. That's 57% reduction of demand. And that means your annual costs are actually about 57% lower, even if the cost per unit energy were the same. But cost per unit energy of wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of new electricity worldwide. According to the latest analysis by Lazard, for example, they're half, onshore wind and utility solar are half the cost of natural gas, new natural gas. And so this means you're going to get additional, beyond that 57% reduction of demand, you're getting another 10 or 20% averaged over everything reduction of cost per unit energy. So on the order of 60 to 65% reduction of annual costs of energy. And then you save health costs and climate costs. So that's a 90% total a reduction in social costs of energy due to transitioning. So the United States, China, India, all countries in the UK would benefit substantially from going to clean renewable energy as fast as possible. And it's because we have 95% of the technologies to do that, there's no reason not to start as fast as possible today.
Great. Sam, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think take a slightly more skeptical view, I think, of our chances of reaching fossil fuel free by 2050. And I think Mark's right in the sense that technically or technologically and economically, it can definitely be done, but it's just the political will. And I think we are sort of seeing that in some ways at the COP26, something that's going on right now. You know, both China and India are sort of committing to net zero, but it's sort of 2060 and 2070, and it's you know, these are two of the largest users of fossil fuels, and I don't think the US has committed to a net zero target or a fossil free target, but I could be wrong about that. But from my, I don't know, I take a slightly different view on that, which yeah, as I say, is maybe slightly more skeptical. But on the point about Denmark and Sweden as well, I think it's not necessarily about population size or, you know, the scale of the country. I think there's more contributing factors than just that. I think it's also to do with the sort of historical sort of energy system or energy setup of the sector. So Denmark and Sweden's a particularly interesting case because in the 60s and 70s they both had big oil crises. You know, the cost of oil skyrocketed, and they had to look at alternative ways to supply their energy to, you know, their economy. And so they went heavy on district heating networks in the two countries, and now sort of Copenhagen's 98% district heating covered, and I think Denmark as a whole is sort of 65% covered by district heating to supply heating to buildings. And we know that heating is a massive issue. You know, we sort of have a pathway to decarbonising vehicle transport. We have a pathway to sort of decarbonising the electricity grid in general, but heating is a real tricky subject, and one that we don't quite have a pathway for decarbonising. And I suppose that's quite specific to maybe Northern European countries, but given that's where Denmark and Sweden are, I think it's pertinent to mention them. And so they have this infrastructure installed already, which can actually be decarbonised quite effectively, quite quickly. And so their 2050 fossil-free target is pretty achievable. I just wonder whether it's doable for the UK. For the US, I have significant doubts, but certainly in Denmark and Sweden, there's some scope for achieving that for sure.
Richard?
Just unmute myself. No, so I think there's some really good comments there. Yeah, just on the political point, I mean, clearly we can see that there are clearly, you know, political challenges. I think at the national level, also sort of globally in terms of, you know, geopolitics. But you know, obviously politicians, you know, want to be in power, want to stay in power, and climate change is increasingly, you know, a priority for many more voters than previously. So I think that's encouraging, you know, more ambitious commitments and action than before. And you know, I think recently many governments and voters have seen sort of firsthand the impacts of global warming. And I think as global warming intensifies, then there'll be even more societal pressure for accelerated action, which in turn will lead to sort of governments, you know, committing to more ambitious action. So I'm more of, you know, I fully I fully accept the obstacles, the challenges, but I'm more of on sort of more of an optimist in that I can clearly there are limitations to the current pledges, but I think for me the message would be there's a clear direction of travel. So I wouldn't see these as the final destination. And as the the costs of key technologies, technologies continue to reduce as more and more voters become increasingly concerned about the escalating climate crisis. As pressure intensifies from other key stakeholder groups like investors, we'll see sort of more sort of possibility for more aggressive and ambitious targets. So I fully agree that right now that is a key challenge, both at the national level, because I think more voters are engaged, but still the majority of voters are not ever so engaged with climate change. And then there are all the geopolitical considerations. But I think in the next few years there will be increased. Again, there's a clear direction of travel, so I think there will be increased pressure demand for change, and this will sort of allow quicker progress in these areas.
Great. We've already touched on this, but Sam, what additional infrastructure is required to deliver fossil-free energy by 2050, in your opinion?
I think if we were to go down that sort of electrification of energy route that I think Mark mentioned earlier, I think that's pretty much going to be the approach to most countries across the world. Then we're clearly going to need significant infrastructure reinforcements, as Mark mentioned, and we want to all charge our cars and heat our homes or cool our buildings adequately. So, the ability to provide that full electrification is going to be pretty challenging. Looking at from a UK perspective, specifically, I think the initial sort of estimates or studies have suggested that maybe peak demands can increase by 15 to 20%, which I think is a really conservative estimate, and costs potentially in the hundreds of billions to fully not just provide the infrastructure in terms of transmission and distribution networks and reinforcing those, but also all of the renewable generation that's required, the energy storage that will be required, the new types of sort of dispatchable energy plants like hydrogen combined cycle gas turbines, for example. All of that infrastructure is going to be in the hundreds of billions over the next few decades, really, maybe 2-3 decades. So it's really quite significant, and I think beyond the sort of UK context, maybe in countries where infrastructure is not so well developed, I guess the relative cost could be more significant. For example, in the UK, although it will be high cost, there's already a sort of relatively good existing infrastructure in the ground that can be reinforced. But in places where that's not available, that could be a more significant challenge. But ultimately, I think on a global basis, it's going to be in the trillions of dollars to really ramp up the sort of or to convert or transition the global system to a fully electrified one.
Okay, Richard, I don't know if you have any comments to add on this. It appears we've lost Richard for the moment. Hopefully we can get him back online. Mark, if a switch was made to 100% renewable energy, could supply and price stability be guaranteed?
Well, I think so, and I agree with Sam that the main obstacles are social and political. We're not going to change unless we want to collectively. So that's the biggest obstacle. We do find that, yeah, we'll not only have lower costs, use less energy, and have a much more efficient system, but we'll also keep a stable grid. We actually have analyzed this grid stability every 30 seconds in all 145 countries worldwide and find that there's no issue keeping the grid stable. It will require sometimes overbuilding generation, sometimes excess storage, But because the overall costs are so low, even having more generators than we need, more storage than you might otherwise have, is not that much additional cost. We do calculate that the worldwide transition cost is around 60 to 62 trillion dollars, and in Europe it's about close to 7 trillion, in the US about close to 8 trillion, and China's around 13 trillion to transition. And that sounds like, oh, it's a lot of money. But it does pay itself off within 5 years, because you're compared with the business as usual case, we're reducing our energy costs per year by on the order of a little over 60%. And so when you just calculate that cost savings per year, it's on a 5-year payback before you even count for the social costs. And the social cost payback is, because there are 7 million people die from air pollution worldwide from fossil fuels and biofuels. And the social cost of that is just enormous, as well as the climate damage that's occurring and is going to grow in the future. It's so large that when you actually transition, you eliminate all these health and climate costs that add up to a total of around $30 trillion each per year. So $60 trillion just in health and climate costs per year savings. And so it's just it's a non-starter to even think about, whether you're going to save money. You're going to save so much money. In terms of, Sam mentioned the district heating in Northern Europe, and actually there's an advantage of electrifying everything with district heating. They actually have seasonal heat storage that's installed in several places in Canada and in Northern Europe and Denmark in particular, and Sweden. There's underground seasonal district heating in boreholes, aquifers, and water pits, where you can store heat up to 6 months. And there are cases now where they have these plants that have been around for a while, and you can store the electricity. In the summer, you collect the heat, usually in terms of solar collectors, and then that heat just gets stored underground in boreholes or these big water pits, like in Vogens, Denmark, for example. There's a town that has 2,500 people on this district heating system, where their heat comes from a water pit storage. And then there's, I think it's the Copenhagen airport or something, that's on aquifer heat storage underground. So you can collect heat in the summer, store it in the winter, and they're doing that in the UK as well. And in the UK, I think Boris Johnson has this big heat pump program where he's trying to put heat pumps in lots of homes. I don't know how many exactly, but it really just requires policies to put in place. And these policies are actually very effective in several places around the world. I mean, South Australia is, close to, between 70 and 90%. It's gone up to 100% renewables. California, on the annual average, is 55% renewable electricity. And there's a case in Vietnam, I think the end of last year, they installed 10 gigawatts of solar on rooftops in 1 month. 10 gigawatts. I mean, that's almost 10 nuclear power plants of peak capacity in 1 month they installed, because of a feed-in tariff policy. And you can see that it is, I'm just pointing out that it's not necessarily easy worldwide to do this on a large scale, but it's definitely possible. And if we put our mind collectively to it, we can affect policies. In the US, in fact, there are 15 states that have policies to go to 100% renewables between 2030 and 2050. And we want to ratchet that down to get these laws to be 2035 to 2040, because 2050 is actually really pushing it and allows people to delay when it's not necessary to delay.
I think it's worth pointing out that we're all quite disappointed with Boris Johnson's heat pump policy. It's a fraction of what's needed, but it is, as you say, it is kind of, we're slowly getting there, but it's a slow moving beast, unfortunately. But yeah, just thought I'd made that point.
Yeah, good point.
So it's also that sort of that social value as well, I think, is a really important one that almost always gets missed. And Rich has probably got more thoughts on this than I do, but it's just we don't look at what the counterfactual really is. And the counterfactual is, it's not just, oh, we continue using fossil fuels or we move to renewables. It's we continue using fossil fuels and potentially harm billions of people and at a huge economic cost, let alone social cost, or we move to renewables, and that is in some ways limited. But yeah, sorry, go on, Rich.
Okay, well, I'll just I'm not on mute, am I? No, I'm not on mute. No, so I agree with those comments. I mean, I suppose we see it everywhere, really, that there's so many governments and companies are making progress in certain areas, and then in other areas we see sort of some policies that go more in the other direction. So it's we see this sort of these mixed messages being sort of sent in a lot of places, with progress in certain areas being sort of partly offset by sort of policies going in the opposite direction in other areas. So it's it's no, that's all I'll add to that, really.
And what innovations are we seeing in renewable energy technology that could make this fossil fuel world achievable? Question for you, Sam.
Sorry. I think the key is flexibility. So flexibility in supply and demand. So the actual sort of technological or technology development is, there are certainly things that improving efficiencies of certain technologies, or making them more applicable in certain contexts in certain locations, and that's all going on, and that's all good stuff. But I think there's more of a sort of this sort of aspect of flexibility, which I think is quite important these days, and is becoming more and more a talking point and a focal point for developing sort of renewable energy systems, even from small scales up to larger scales. So we know that renewable energy is inherently intermittent, and well, the majority of it is intermittent, and it's not predictable. It's not unpredictable as some people may think. It's important to denote that there's a distinction there. So we can predict when there will be renewable energy available, but it is intermittent. So we have to sort of make sure that we can balance the supply with the demand in a kind of technically or technologically and cost-effective way. So so we can match up those demands with the supply of energy, and it's a major area of innovation right now in the sector. So things like demand side response, so particularly around sort of electric vehicle charging, energy and energy use in buildings, in homes, in offices, that aspect of demand side response, where there's a sort of control system which is able to kind of charge up a local storage system, or allow fridges to be slightly warmer at certain times when the electricity is cheap, but is more expensive, ramping it up when it's cheaper, to try and make the whole sort of use of renewable electricity and energy in general more cost effective. And then on a sort of larger scale, there's obviously large scale batteries, which are going in at a rate of knots at the moment, and other sort of storage technologies like hydrogen, and maybe also ammonia is coming in as well as a potential storage sort of type system or technology. And then all of that kind of comes under this concept of smart energy systems. So how you store and deploy and dispatch energy in a sort of integrated, holistic way, that kind of all the different systems are talking to each other, and so you can have this kind of overarching, highly efficient system that reduces or minimizes the cost as much as it can. And I think at the larger scales, those systems are desperately complicated and complex. And at times, working in that sort of field, because we do at Element Energy, we do a lot of work in this space, and I think I do sometimes question whether the solutions on national scales or even regional scales could be refined in simplicity in some way. So, for example, having a kind of a fully interconnected kind of future hydrogen transmission and distribution system, which is sort of smartly controlled between regions, is, I think, slightly fanciful on a complexity and cost basis. But at the kind of more local scale, smaller scale, I think those approaches are slowly kind of starting to be better understood, and we're starting to see them getting implemented more and more. So yeah, I think on a sort of cutting edge technology basis, I think the innovative approaches or technologies or systems that are being looked at are kind of, how do we store energy and how do we dispatch it at a time and that's sort of cost effective for the consumer and for the generator. So things like compressed air storage or the use of gravity with elevated weight for storing energy, storing potential energy to then release when it's needed. I think these types of things are coming in. They're still sort of immature technologies, so they're still sort of being developed, and their cost effectiveness is still still maturing. But I think we'll see more and more of that as a displacement of sort of maybe more resource heavy systems like lithium-ion batteries, for example.
Richard or Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add to this question.
I'll mention, yeah, so in addition to storage, because everything, we're going to reduce energy demand significantly, but then we're going to basically double electricity demand. So all energy demand will go down about 60%, but all that energy we're going to use is electricity. So electricity storage will be key, and the cost of batteries, and there are many different types of batteries that are being developed now, and their costs are coming down. So that's really key, in addition to the fact that generator costs are coming down significantly. But a lot of the world's energy is transportation, and a portion of this is aircraft and long-distance ships. And we're seeing electric aircraft now being flown, small ones, and plans and prototypes for larger ones expected in commercial airlines are going to, for at least 400 or 500 to 600 kilometers, will be available within 2 or 3 years. So that's a big advancement, is electrifying aircraft. Yeah. For long distance aircraft, we're going to need hydrogen fuel cells, and we only propose green hydrogen fuel cells where the hydrogen is produced from electricity. So that's really the one area where we don't have well, we do have some hydrogen fuel cell planes prototypes available now, but they're short distance. But so jumbo jets, we're going to need those, and we do know Airbus is, and I think Boeing even probably has some plans, but Airbus for sure has plans to build hydrogen fuel cell aircraft for long distance flights, and we need that for ships, military equipment. And the good news is it's technically possible to do this, but we just don't have commercialized examples of long distance ships and aircraft. And trains are already electric for long distance. We can electrify rail, so that's an existing technology. And for long distance trucks, for up to 1,000 kilometers, we can use electric. Beyond that, you might need hydrogen fuel cell. And there are a couple of companies like Daimler, for example, is building hydrogen fuel cell trucks. So these are examples where we need innovation, and we see it occurring. And also transitioning industry, a recent development is the development of almost 100% renewable steel, because you can, there's a hydrogen production process to get steel. You need to take iron oxide and purify the iron, and usually that's done with carbon that releases carbon dioxide. But there's a method where you can reduce the iron oxide to pure iron with hydrogen, and if you produce the hydrogen with renewable electricity, then that's green hydrogen, and you can get close to 98% CO2-free steel in both the energy production and the chemical reaction part, if you produce the hydrogen with renewable electricity. So there's actually a steel plant in Sweden that's doing this, and this process is working and is actually producing steel already. So that's an innovation. And there are some other industrial processes like silicon production that also need to be transitioned, and cement manufacturing where you have CO2. Yeah, CO2 as a chemical product in addition to from the energy production. And cleaning up the energy, you can get rid of half the CO2 from cement, but then you have to get rid of the other half. And there actually are methods of producing cement that don't require steel. Now, I'm not in favor of any carbon capture because you always need energy for carbon capture, and that energy, if it's renewable energy, is just taking that renewable energy away from replacing a coal or a gas plant. So if you just use carbon capture to take CO2 out of the air, then you're preventing that carbon capture, you're preventing that energy, that renewable energy, if it is renewable, from reducing air pollution and mining and taking CO2 out of the air. So it's an opportunity cost. But actually, in fact, carbon capture is not even running on renewable energy now, it's running on fossil fuels. And then the carbon is almost most of it's being used for enhanced oil recovery. So it's actually, from most analyses, I've done some and others, people have done it as well. There's no proof we're really reducing any carbon, but we're definitely increasing air pollution. We're increasing fuel mining by doing this, but I think that's another question.
Thank you. Richard, sorry, did you want to comment?
One comment on that, if I may. I mean, I think it's great that Mark's sort of mentioned, some of these sort of hard to abate sectors, steel and cement. I think that's great because I do think when a lot of people think about sort of tackling climate change, they often think about sort of energy, and they often think about sort of solutions like solar and wind and electric vehicles, and obviously they're all really important. But I think there are really important sort of sectors and emission sources that get a lot less attention. So some of these sort of hard to abate sectors like cement and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, some other areas, they're really significant too. And obviously, the goal is to fully decarbonize the economy. So that means we need to decarbonize all sectors. And at the moment, in some sectors, there are pretty clear decarbonisation pathways. We've been sort of talking around energy and how some of the sub sectors there's a clear pathway. For others, well, Mark will say there is. So anyway, we have sort of pathways there, but so when we come to some of the others, like sort of cement, steel, really significant sectors globally, there hasn't been a zero carbon sort of solution for those industries, because as Mark touched on, one significant source of emissions in those industries is the sort of the process emissions, where CO2 is released as a byproduct from producing the cement or steel. So that's the chemistry, and so we need to find zero carbon solutions there. So it's great that there are these sort of really exciting solutions that are at an early stage. There are sort of a pilot phase, in some cases sort of theoretical stage. So I think clearly, one sort of key point is that for some of these sort of promising, nascent technologies, there is a need for sort of, I would say, for governments to sort of invest in these promising technologies, because in the initial phase, when they're not commercially viable, they'll struggle to attract a lot of private sector investment. So there's a real role then for governments to play to help sort of incubate these technologies, so that they can then be developed, and then when they're more commercially viable, then the private sector will become sort of more involved, and we'll sort of become actively involved with the sort of the upscaling and the rollout. But I think obviously our culture is very short-termist, and everyone's looking for sort of quick results. But that's also, I think, the case with climate change, that companies, the governments, they're looking for the low-hanging fruit, the quick results, things that they can sort of implement that will give a quick return, so they'll be able to say that what the impact was. But there are some areas that where we don't yet have sort of commercially viable zero carbon solutions that can be rolled out sort of internationally, and so where there will be a need to invest, and where we may not see any return on investment for 5 or 10 years, which could then fall in a different political administration. And I think that's a challenge, because that's harder to sell than something where you can sort of have an initiative, and you know straight away what the return on the investment is going to be, what the emissions sort of saving is going to be. But yet it's critical that we also invest and ring fence investments in some of these hard to abate solutions, where there isn't currently a sort of a widely available, feasible zero carbon solution.
And Richard, fossil fuel divestment has seen increased momentum. Does that mean that we're moving closer to a fossil fuel free 2050?
No, not necessarily. I'm an optimist, but no, no, and I think divestments, has become a very significant sort of a movement. But obviously, climate change is a systemic issue, and so to tackle that, we need to look at all of the system, the full picture, and so. If we think of decarbonisation and sort of moving away from fossil fuels, well, obviously there are many things that need to happen, but I mean, basically the fossil fuels that we'll use will be the sort of the gap between the clean energy supply and the total energy use. Well, that's sort of obvious, but but that means that in order to tackle decarbonisation and move away from fossil fuels, we need to sort of focus on sort of different areas. We need to sort of focus on scaling up the clean energy. We also need to focus on sort of bringing down the demand for fossil fuels, and also constraining the supply of fossil fuels. And when we look at what's currently happening, we can see yes, there are a lot of good initiatives, but we can clearly see we're not there at the moment. I mean, on the supply side, as things currently stand, there are a lot of companies that are planning to ramp up their production, fossil fuel extraction in sort of throughout this decade. So clearly work to be done on that side. So divestment, I would say, is very significant, but obviously again we're faced with a systemic challenge, so we need systemic solutions. Divestment has become very significant in a short space of time. I mean, just in under 10 years, it's gone from being sort of quite a a niche issue that initially was being championed by educational sort of bodies, universities that were sort of focusing on the moral argument, and there's been huge growth. I think now we're pushing sort of $15 trillion of divestments or commitments to divest from fossil fuels, and in addition to that growth in recent years, we've also seen diversification with investors, large institutional investors becoming increasingly active and concerned in this area, because increasingly investors are equating climate risk with financial risk. So that sort of led to this diversification. A lot of companies, a lot of investors, are worried about the potential financial risks, understandably from climate change. I mean, there was a study that came out in Nature Energy a few days ago, which sort of looked at the risk of stranded assets in terms of fossil fuels, and how through a net zero pathway, there could be there could be sort of 50% of fossil fuel investments could become worthless under a net zero transition by sort of 2035, $11 trillion. So clearly then there's this divestment as diversified, as broadened to also now become a key financial consideration. Companies worried about the transition risks, the physical risks connected to the net zero transition, and then obviously on the other side, the key clean tech technologies have become a lot more established. The costs have plummeted, so they increasingly look safe, good long-term investments. So I'm sure those trends are only going to increase and intensify. Then it's sort of connected to all of the net zero commitments that we're seeing from countries and companies. So significant. It will become more significant. Obviously, there are many other things that need to happen as well. And maybe just one other comment is clearly that's one trend that we see: divestment becoming more and more significant. But also, then we've seen recently examples of high-profile examples of activist investors that have achieved significant results at oil and gas majors, by being able to influence the decarbonisation climate strategy plans for large oil and gas majors. Clearly there are different schools of thought. There are those that will say instead of divestment, better to sort of stay invested and help sort of influence from within. I think that the end goal is clear. We have to decarbonize. We have to decarbonize as quickly as we can. But there can be different pathways to get to that. So divestment can be effective, especially when funds are then redirected into clean tech solutions to help with the upscaling of those. And if investors are going to stay invested in emission intensive industries, well, as we've seen recently, that can work, provided that they're actively working on driving change.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think will be the economic impact of moving entirely from fossil fuel to renewable energy? Richard?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, the one point to emphasise is we have to make this transition. We have to decarbonise as quickly as possible. We have to move to renewable energy, to clean tech. And I say that because I think sometimes in these discussions around costs, economic impacts, the costs focus very much on the costs of action, which are obviously very, very important. But that is only sort of one side of what we need to consider here. The other side is the costs of inaction, and the science is very clear that continued business as usual, unabated fossil fuel extraction use, and anthropogenic emissions from other sources, land use change, and so on, would risks leading to runaway global warming that would pose an existential threat to humanity, to our civilization, to the economy. So I think we have to bear that in mind. Sometimes that's sort of that's kind of overlooked. So I think it's fundamental to remember always that is the context, and hence the costs of action then are a lot less than the costs of inaction. In terms of the cost of action, though, there have been a lot of studies that have been undertaken in recent years that have looked to estimate the costs of transitioning, and and many have shown, including studies that we have done as EY, many have shown net economic benefits in terms of job clean green jobs, and net economic benefits, net social benefits through improved air quality and reduced health costs. There's one study recently from IRENA which estimated over $1 trillion of increased GDP globally by doubling the renewable energy share over this decade. And then at EY, we've done a couple of studies recently, one globally, the other at the European level. At the European level, we engaged with sort of extensive stakeholder consultation and desktop review, and we identified 10 million jobs that could, 10 million green jobs that could be created over across the European region with shovel-ready renewable energy projects that are sort of in the pipeline, that are sort of awaiting finance. Over 10,000, sort of around 13,000 projects that could be developed, that could potentially create 10 million new jobs. These are the global stats, for sort of about 2 million jobs in the US, similarly in China, and hundreds of thousands of new jobs in many other countries, from European EU countries to Australia, India, Canada, over the next decade. Obviously, this transition. So, as I said, these are sort of the net benefits. Clearly, some industries and areas will be are at risk of being sort of negatively impacted. So then it's really essential to sort of manage this transition as well as possible, sort of to focus on a just transition, because clearly regions and then sectors connected to emission intensive industries are going to need to transition to other areas. So there's a huge amount that will need to be done to sort of facilitate that transition. So that's going to be a key challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Just reminding the audience that if you do have questions, please continue to submit them in the questions box. Mark, we touched on this before. So if we can't make the transition to 100% renewable energy by 2050, are some technology solutions such as carbon capture, are they a good compromise?
No, not at all. I mean, carbon capture will put us further behind. I mean, the problem with carbon capture is not only, it's basically a tax, it just maintains the existing fossil fuel industry. I mean, the fossil fuel industry loves carbon capture because it keeps them in business. So all you're doing with carbon capture, you're not capturing any air pollution. And we're trying to solve the air pollution problem, which is actually much larger than the climate problem right now. 7 million people die every year. It's the second leading cause of death worldwide today. And hundreds of millions of people are ill. It costs $30 trillion per year worldwide right now. And all you're doing with carbon capture is increasing the death rates, because you need energy to run carbon capture equipment. And most of that energy right now is fossil energy. So in fact, like for example, there was only one carbon capture plant attached to energy in the US until it was built in 2017, and it lasted until 2019, and it shut down. It cost $1 billion. There's the Texas Parish plant. It was a coal plant. They added carbon capture equipment. And what did they do? They actually built a natural gas plant just to run the carbon capture equipment for the coal plant. And when you're doing that, you're mining more gas, and then you have not only air pollution from the mining, but then you have leaks of methane, not only in the mining, but in the transport and the processing of the gas, and then you burn the gas, and that's not captured. And so you just have more CO2 from that. Then the capture equipment, on average, over the 3 years that it was active, was only 70% at the coal plant. Didn't capture any of the upstream mining of the coal. You needed all this additional gas. And when you actually, before you even accounted for what happened to the CO2 after, only 11% of all that carbon that was emitted from the natural gas, the mining of the gas, the coal, the mining of the coal, only 11% was captured over a 20-year time frame when you account for the methane. And so there's hardly anything. And then what do they do with the CO2 that's captured? They sent it to an oil field nearby, and to pump more oil out of the ground, because it binds with oil. The carbon dioxide binds with oil to make it lighter and come to the surface faster. 40% of that CO2 that was captured, which is only 11% of the total, was lost back to the air from that process. So we're talking about 6% capture rate. And we don't even know that the rest was stored in the ground. There's no proof, but they just say it was. And then they shut it. It's so inefficient and expensive. It cost $1 billion just to build the additional equipment. And that's just who pays for that. It's the people who can afford it the least. People who have low income and pay a higher fraction of their electricity, of their energy, of their income towards electricity. And so it's basically just a tax that could have taken that money, replaced the coal plant with wind turbines or solar panels, and eliminated air pollution, eliminated mining, and eliminated more CO2 for sure. and save consumers money at the same time. So carbon capture is a scam. It is a complete and utter scam. There is no case where it's actually good for anything. And you can check, we examined a direct air capture plant too. It's the same thing. You don't reduce any air pollution, you don't reduce any mining, you only increase air pollution or mining. Even if it's running on renewable electricity, that renewable electricity is much better used from a social cost point of view and a direct cost point of view, just to replace a coal plant or a gas plant. People argue, well, what if we've eliminated fossil fuels? Okay, well, let's have that discussion at that time when we've eliminated fossil fuels. Then people say, well, we need CO2 removal even after eliminating all fossil fuels, and that's just not true either. IPCC, the last report, says that there's a certain amount of carbon we can emit until 2050 to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Well, if we eliminate 80% of emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2050, that will keep us under 1.5 degrees, according to their own numbers. And CO2 will come out of the air naturally over time. We'll get to 350 parts per million if we eliminate 80% by 2030, 100% by 2050. We'll get down to 350 parts per million in the atmosphere. And also, by the way, eliminating all non-energy emissions as well. We'll get to 350 parts per million by 2100. So there's actually no argument for direct air capture even after fossil fuels are gone. And even if there are actually other ways to reduce CO2 that are better than direct air capture, reducing biomass burning, increasing reforestation, reducing methane leaks from landfills and rice paddies, and nitrous oxide emissions, reducing halogen emissions. All these are just lower hanging fruit than direct air capture or carbon capture. So I just think it's just a waste of time, and it's a distraction from what really works.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mark, on anything you just said. Particularly on I think you said reduced biomass burning as well. I think that's absolutely necessary because it's also a false economy of a false carbon economy, really. I think this is why at the beginning I said I'm skeptical and pessimistic, and I think it's because Australia recently announced that they're going net zero by 2050 or 2060 or something, but hydrogen production is their big sort of statement piece, but it's all going to be done by natural gas and carbon capture and storage. Similarly for the UK, clearly we're in some sort of the natural gas DNOs or the gas lobbies have managed to get in there and into our politics and have pushed the government down the gas with CCS route. So there's another big emitter who is dedicated to gas CCS, which is fanciful in my mind as well, Mark. And I can't see the US really at this point committing to anything but gas with CCS. So if we're going down this hydrogen route, we are stuck with gas CCS at the moment. And even if that happens, as you say, we've got a volume of emissions that we can't just sort of emit up to 2050 and then just cut it all out. There has to be a very steep decline in emissions over time, and I just don't see how that's going to happen. We've only got 20-30 years to really get our act together, and I don't see in the next 10 whether we're really going to make that progress. And maybe the 10 after that, as you said before, people will start to put pressure on politicians and things will change. But at this point in time, it just feels I feel pessimistic about it, and as you can tell,
So, how do you think that the carbon emissions in hard to abate sectors, how can that be addressed, if not carbon capture?
Well, let me just mention that really quick. So for cement, there's geopolymer cement that reduces 80% of carbon dioxide from the whole process. In addition to, well, half the CO2 from cement is energy, half is process emissions. And you can eliminate 80% with what's called geopolymer cement. I mean, the Brisbane airport in Australia was built with geopolymer cement. It's it's been around for a long time. There's also ferroc, which is another type of cement. So, I mean, this is an existing technology. If you just transition, and just like with steel, you can get 98% reduction of carbon with steel. But again, even if you couldn't, it's better to actually let the process CO2, well, we can always get rid of the energy CO2 from just going to renewable energy. But even the process CO2 is, again, better to use that energy to try to run carbon capture equipment to try to get rid of other CO2 emissions. Eliminating emissions of CO2 from any source is beneficial. And so there are alternatives to cement and steel and also silicon that are much better than trying to use carbon capture. The problem with carbon capture is again it's always going to, people use, say for hydrogen, I mean, the main way of producing hydrogen today is with natural gas, steam reforming, in fact. And they're saying, well, let's add carbon capture to that. I mean, that's just ridiculous. That actually, because there's already green, they're saying that's a bridge field to green hydrogen. Well, green hydrogen already exists. I mean, there are already places producing green hydrogen, and China is like just building these huge electrolyzers right now and in the US, there are like multiple green hydrogen plants. In Europe, there are a few. So, and blue hydrogen doesn't exist except for a couple demonstration plants. So it's really, green hydrogen is already here, blue hydrogen is not here. And the gas industry is arguing, well, we need a bridge fuel to green hydrogen. It's just the opposite. We don't need that because, all you do is add more pipes. You need mining of methane. You need pipes, more pipes to get to the SMR equipment, steam reforming equipment. You need SMR equipment, you need carbon capture equipment, then you need pipes of CO2 back somewhere, either to enhanced oil recovery or to an underground well to store the CO2. Instead, there are now technologies where you can actually just produce hydrogen with a solar panel. Inside the solar panel, there's hydrogen electrolyzers. And so you just need one piece of equipment, and then to store the hydrogen, and then you need like a wind turbine solar panel to provide the electricity. It's so much simpler, and it already exists. So it's just an argument by the fossil fuel industry. Blue hydrogen, carbon capture, direct air capture, these are just technologies that the fossil fuel industry will try to push on us, and they will not do anything for helping the climate because, and they say, well, we can't speed up renewable energy to run carbon capture equipment fast enough. Well, but they want to you take renewable energy and use that for the carbon capture equipment. I mean, it's just, their arguments are so convoluted right now that they're just starting to trip over all their arguments because we already have renewable energy and it's growing, and yet they want to take renewable energy and use that to run their carbon capture equipment and then tell us that we can't implement renewable energy fast enough to get rid of CO2, so therefore we need carbon capture, but their own technologies rely on renewable energy.
A key problem, particularly in the UK and Europe, is the carbon that's released from the operation of buildings and homes. And retrofitting is seen as a solution to this, but obviously that's a particular challenge. So what do you think that this could be the solutions? How can we deploy further retrofitting across the UK, across the US, Europe?
Well, I'll just be really short because I can let other people talk. But I mean, I retrofitted my first home in 2005 to entirely renewable energy with heat pumps, replacing gas heater with a heat pump, with an air source heat pump, replaced for air heating and water heating. Went to LED lights. You add insulation to make your home energy efficient. And then I built a new home in 2017. It's all electric. There's no gas. It's running perfectly for 4.5 years. I haven't paid an electricity bill. I haven't paid a natural gas bill. I haven't paid a gasoline bill because I have electric cars. I have batteries in the garage. These are technologies that are here now, and it's really just a question of retrofitting is straightforward. New buildings are straightforward. We need laws. I mean, California's had a law since 2020. All new buildings have to be zero net energy, which means solar on the roof, and ideally batteries and electric. This just requires policies to be put in place. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, so appropriate policies need to be put in place. But is that the only solution to the challenge of retrofitting? What about skills shortages and the lack of demand that we see, particularly across the UK and Europe?
Sorry, the lack of demand.
Richard, Sam, Richard, if you want to comment on this. So, there's affordability when it comes to retrofitting. There's lack of demand from households. How could that be addressed?
Yes, I think we saw the lack in the UK again specifically. We saw that the market's not primed to do this sort of scale of retrofit that we need when the government released its Green Homes grant. There was a huge demand for accessing the grant, but there weren't enough people to deliver the installation of the retrofitting of homes. And it wasn't like they were funding full house retrofit, whole home retrofit. It was you know, things as simple as roof insulation or double glazing or solid flooring. You know, there was some relatively straightforward retrofit measures that were being funded, but the sector wasn't primed. So there's definitely a shortage of people to do that. Plus, we need gas engineers to retrain as heat pump engineers to be able to install all of the heat pumps that we're, you know, 600,000 by 2028 per year, up to 1 million by 2030. I mean, well, who's going to do all that? We just don't. This doesn't exist at the moment. And maybe Richard, you got a thought on that as well.
Well, there's a couple of other points I wanted to make. I think we've run out of time, haven't we? Do we have time?
Yeah, we've run out of time. 10 seconds, Richard.
Oh wow, pressure's on then. Just really quickly. So I think we've covered so the energy sector, the hard to abate sectors. Also, I think is one comment on sort of nature-based solutions. You know, as well as the climate crisis, we're also facing biodiversity crisis. They're interconnected, and we won't be able to tackle the climate crisis effectively if we don't also simultaneously tackle the biodiversity crisis. And you know, nature has been doing a big part of the job for us, essentially for free, in removing a lot of our carbon pollution from the atmosphere through our forests, oceans, and other sort of natural assets. They're increasingly under stress. So clearly, you know, a key part of what we need to do is to focus on preserving our remaining natural assets, and then also on the other side, restoration at scale.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great note to end on. So thank you so much to our panelists for this really interesting discussion. Reminder that we will publish our recording and written summary of this webinar, as well as the presentation online. And please feel free to share this recording with your professional networks. Please also take a few moments to let us know what you thought about today's session by completing an online poll, which will appear on your screens at the end of the webinar. And please also do join us for another webinar in the future. The next webinars in our WBEF COP26 series is on the 11th of November, Room to Breathe, Creating Quality of Green Spaces, and on the 18th of November on the Biodiversity Net Gain. Our thanks once again to A-Site, the World Built Environment Forum lead tech partner. We have an essay competition showcasing the best thinking from RSCS young professionals. Have your thinking profiled by World Built Environment Forum, and that could be read by thousands of professionals. It will be judged by a panel of senior professionals from the built and natural environment. Please find out more about this competition and how to enter online on our website. The World Built Environment Forum Global Summit will be visiting Dubai as part of the Expo 2020 Dubai in January 2022. The program will focus on livable city, agile, healthy and resilient. Please visit the website rscs.org/webef for further details on the program. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn, where you can receive news of upcoming webinars as well as recently published articles. Finally, you can download the WBEF app from the App Store or Google Play, where you can access the latest innovative global thought leadership content across the built environment. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.